Carburetor tuning isn't difficult, but it generally takes a significant amount of time to get right, and it's a moving target. So before we go start tuning on the GMC, let's make sure we got the basics covered. Let's go. Tuning isn't just checking one thing off a list and never coming back to it. It's a process that continues to adjust each tuning point within the system until you find the best combination for it all. And that's what makes it very difficult is most folks will just concentrate on just the carburetor and not consider all the other pieces that are part of the puzzle. If you've watched all of the videos that I've done on Edelbrock carburetors, Holley carburetors, doesn't really matter. This is covering for both of them, but today we're going to be doing tuning on the Edelbrock carburetor on the GMC truck, but the principles are all the same. So if you've watched all those other videos on how important a fuel system is, how important ignition timing is, and then all the systems of a carburetor and how they work, how they function, and how you make adjustments to them so you can get what you want out of them. And that's really the key to the whole thing. Like I said, it's not just setting it once and never coming back to it. You may end up, as you're tuning the carburetor, you may come back to timing 2 or 3 times. Now, on the GMC truck, we are set about 12 to 14 degrees before top dead center. I'm down closer to sea level. That seems to be where it likes to live right now. But as we tune through this, maybe as we add more fuel, maybe if we take some away, I don't know what it's going to need right off the bat. We may end up coming back and readjusting timing again. So that's why I said it's not just a single process where you're only touching the carburetor and nothing else. Fuel pressure regulator is a great example of that. As we go through the process, and as I know that the GMC is going to need a little less fuel. I know that. We'll talk about that when we get outside to the truck. But in that case, because the regulator is a tuning point, you can slowly take away flow or pressure from the regulator if the carburetor doesn't need it so much. So let's say you've got a really mild 283 or 289, doesn't require a lot of fuel. You may not run it at 6 psi. You may drop down to 5. You may drop down to 4.5. Really all depends on the application. So don't think that once you've got something set, you're never going to come back to it. It's the furthest thing from the truth. And that's what we're going to cover today is all the steps that it's going to take to get the carburetor on the truck tuned and dialed in correctly. So before you get out there and start doing anything on the vehicle, you need to make sure that those 3 basic systems are correct. Ignition system is primary and the most important in the tuning process. Making sure the fuel system is correct with the right fuel filters. Make sure you run a pressure regulator. I know I've heard it 1,000 times. I've answered that question. It seems like 1,000 times here on the channel. Well, I've got a stock fuel pump. I don't need a pressure regulator, right? No, run a pressure regulator. Again, it gives you one more adjustability and tunability in a system that doesn't really have a lot. So when you give yourself another level of adjustability, it's a good thing. Plus, you're able to regulate the amount of flow and pressure that the carburetor sees. That's not a bad thing at all. So those 3 things, super critical. They have to be right. Or if you just go out there and start monkeying with a brand new carburetor and you don't look at timing, if you don't look at the condition of your ignition system, if you don't have the ability to adjust pressure, if you don't have the right fuel filters on there, you're running dirty fuel through it, really doesn't matter. It's going to fight you the entire time. If you get all the initial stuff set up right to begin with, the tuning process goes so much easier. Let's talk about the tools you're going to need. Now, the truck has a tachometer in it, but my timing light also has a tach on there. You're going to need one under hood. At least it's a little bit easier to work through that process if you can quickly look at the tachometer, plus the timing light, vacuum gauge, and then all the tuning components. Now, Edelbrock makes it very simple. You buy a tuning or a calibration kit. It's got everything you need. Holley's a little more complicated with jets and power valves, but make sure that you have those tools available to you as you work through it. Now, I did a video on initial setup. It is different than the tuning process. So initial setup meaning getting the fuel system right, timing right, but just setting up the carburetor basic, get the idle mixture dialed in, get the highest amount of vacuum, get the idle speed set, start working on step-up springs if it's a Holley carburetor or a Edelbrock carburetor, power valve, initial power valve selection if it's a Holley carburetor. Get those set first. That is not tuning. That is just basic setup in a system. Then you can start the tuning process. Now today we are not using an AFR gauge. We are going to do this the old school way, and that's just seat of the pants type tuning. That makes it a little more complicated as far as how much time it takes. Tuning generally takes quite a few hours to get done and do correctly because you're constantly having to drive, understand what's happening or get an idea of what's happening, then making changes, see if it made it better or worse. And that's what takes a significant amount of time. With an AFR gauge, that time is cut almost down to a third or a quarter of the time because you're provided real-time data through the exhaust to let you know exactly what changes you made and how it affected it. So seat of the pants is going to take us a little bit more time, but I've got some little things that I do that make that process a little bit easier and gives you some repeatability as you're working through it. So now that we've got all this sorted out, now that we're all ready, let's go out to the truck and I'm going to show you from start to finish, step by step, how I tune a carburetor. So before we get started, there's a couple of things I'm going to do with this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a couple of spark plugs out of here. Now I know this thing was running fairly rich. I was not concerned about that. We were going through the break-in period. It's completely fine to be on the rich side. You're going to pay for it a little bit. Plugs are going to get a little fouled. The oil is going to need a change, but during break-in, I don't really consider that. As long as it's not excessive, it's not too bad. So that's what we're going to do first. I'll pull a couple of spark plugs and we'll kind of take a look at that. Also, I'd highly encourage you to start a little journal page or something. It's just a regular notebook, and just understand or write down the steps of what you were doing during the process. So in this one, it's a 1905 on the GMC truck, stock calibration, silver springs. Every time you make a change with the calibration kit, go ahead and write it down on there or you will forget it. And it's just easier to come back to it and kind of know what it is. And if you want to write down date, temperature, whatever the case may be, any other little variables, that's fine. But that'll get you started. Also, too, I go ahead and print the calibration chart instead of using the book. That way I can, if I need to take any notes or whatever, it just makes it a little bit easier to have it right in front of me and not worry about boogering the tuning book up. So let me pop a couple of spark plugs out. We'll just see what kind of condition those are in before we get started. This is the exact reason why you go ahead and take a look and see what the plugs are doing. Now, these have been in for a little over 1,000 miles, I guess. They went in brand new when I started to do the break-in on this crate engine, and they're not that bad. They're a little on the fat side, but I like the color of the ceramic. It's not completely black and sooty, so they're not near as bad as I thought they were, which tells me the tune isn't as off as I thought it might be. So this is going to go a little bit quicker than I anticipated, but again, it's a good reason to do this so you know exactly where you're starting from. So we know that we're not going to make too many changes here. If I've got any hesitations or stumbles, which I know I do on this truck, we'll just have to annotate where those are, figure out where we want to correct it, whether it's in the step-up spring, rod, jet, whatever. But when we're done with the tuning process, I will put new plugs in it. That way we can start fresh. I will note that in my notebook. We'll know exactly where we're starting from. So one more thing here to show you real quick before we get on the road. Now I take all of my tools with me. So any of the tuning tools I need, calibration kits in here, everything I need to potentially work on this. I'll probably go ahead and grab the timing light as well too, in case I want to adjust timing a little bit while I'm out on the road. But I don't go back and forth from a home base. I literally just pull over into a parking lot if I need to pop the carburetor off or change just a metering rod, whatever the case may be. I will do it all on the road. You can certainly do it your own way, but if you want to come back and forth home or your home office or base or wherever you're working on, no problem. But I typically like to do this all in one shot. Got all the fluids checked, all the plug wires are back on, we're good to go. Now I have a pretty standard loop that I follow as far as where I drive, because I want a lot of different driving conditions. I want a little bit of stop and go, so whether that's traffic lights, stoplights, or stop signs, whatever the case may be, it doesn't matter. Helps me kind of get that off idle from a stop condition. So, if I have a bit of a hesitation, whether it's timing, whether it's the carburetor, then I can test all those. But I've got some 25 mile per hour, 45, 35, 55 mile per hour stuff. I typically don't go any further than that. I don't jump on the highway to do any tuning there because I want to be able to 55 mile per hour zone. I like to kind of slow down a little bit, accelerate from like 40 or 35 up to 55 and just make sure that the cruise and a little bit of the power mode stuff is correct. So, all right, now that we're kind of all done with all that, we got kind of the base of what we're starting with. I've got all it documented. I've got my calibration kit, charts, everything, and we're ready to go drive. All right, first change we're going to make here. So remember, we saw the plugs were a little tan, which isn't bad. But I think what I'm going to do is, because I've got a little bit of a stumble, a little bit of hesitation when it's rolling around 25, 35 miles per hour. So I'm going to take a look at the tuning chart and we'll see what we need to make to richen it up a little bit in the cruise mode. All right, looking at our tuning chart, well, here's our base calibration. I want to go just a little richer in the cruise mode, which is down this way. Up is is rich. This is lean. So from 1, we're going to go to 2. So we'll go back over to our chart. And 2, it's a rod and jet change. So I'm going to go ahead and pop the carburetor off. Take me a few minutes, but no big deal in this parking lot, and make it a little bit easier. But we're going to make that rod and jet change. We'll come back, we'll annotate it, and we'll keep driving. All right, we got it all back together. I would just take a quick little note of why I did it. Slight hesitation between 20 and 30 miles per hour. And step number 2, or number 2 on my cal chart, I went to number 2 on the chart, rod and jet change. So that's all I'm doing here, is we're just making little steps here. I'm going to go ahead and get it up to, I'm in that area where I'm going to be heading into my 45, 55 mile per hour zones here pretty quickly, and that will allow me to give me some time to verify that calibration, because they're not very busy areas that I'll be driving in, so I can slow down to 20 and then accelerate up to 35, 40, 50 miles per hour, and we'll verify if that's right. So if it is, we'll just keep cruising, see what happens, and see what happens next. All right, I had to come back home. 2 reasons. 1, I forgot my timing light, and I think I'm going to add a little bit more timing to it. It's a little stumbly for me, and I think it's a little bit of a timing issue. Maybe adding a little bit more fuel is going to facilitate that. And I think I'm at 12 right now, so I'm going to bump that up to 14, which isn't that bad. It's not that uncommon. That's pretty common for me to run them at that, but I started at 12 because I just anticipated it, and I guessed wrong. The second reason is I forgot my wallet, and before I go tearing around town and hot rodding around, I better grab my wallet. So let's do that. Let's add some timing, and we'll go from there. All right, we're getting there. It liked the timing, so I think what I'm going to do is, now that I've got a little bit more timing in it, I think It needs a little bit more driving, so here's where the time part of it comes in. You're going to spend an awful lot of time just driving. You know, the closer you get to have it tuned, you have to put it through a lot of different situations. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to go out and do some more driving and cruise around, see what happens, and try to put it through some different situations. Drive it a little bit more aggressively, and yeah, see how it works out. But right now, I'm liking where we're at. So we're getting closer, but I knew we weren't going to be too far off given how the plugs look. So let's keep driving. We drove for about maybe 30-40 minutes there. I added some more timing. I went from 14 to 16, and it really likes 16. So starts pretty easy. It's hot, so hot starts aren't an issue. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and drive it a little bit more, and I think we need to add a little bit more fuel now. So that's my next one. It's more in the power mode this time. So what we're going to do is, right now we're on number 2. I need to go a little more aggressive in the power mode. So I think I'm going to jump over here to 11. So I'm going to go ahead and dump that one in. That'll give me just a touch more richer on the power mode. And let's see what that is. 11. Again, rod and jet change. So I went ahead and came home because I want to take the carburetor off, kind of run through it. I'll make the rod and jet change, and then yeah, I think we're pretty decent right now. So once we get to 11, we'll jump back in here and put some more miles on it. But it really liked that 16 degrees. I think it's because the cam's a little bit more aggressive in this thing. Compression's a little higher, and when you have a little bit more grunt in the motor, adding a little more timing isn't a bad thing. So let me do that, make the rod and jet chains, and we'll go from there. Alright, had to run out, so on a new day here, but temperature is pretty close to the same. I tightened up the AVS so it would come in when I wanted it to. So again, we're just making little adjustments here. I think this is okay, but I'm probably going to add a little bit more fuel in the power mode. So I'm going to keep driving it. I've got about maybe 30 minutes of driving on it, and needs a little bit more time just to kind of go through a couple more situations, do some aggressive offline type starting, and I think it needs a little bit more fuel. So timing, I think, is probably pretty good, but yeah, we're still making adjustments here. Okay, yeah, we're definitely going to add some more fuel to it. So let me get tuning charts out here. So we're at 11 right now. I think I want to go over to 12. That'll give me a little more richer on the power. And let's see what that looks like. So it says a jet and rod change. However, that's from the base calibration, but we've got 11 in there now, same jet. So just a rod change. So that'll be easy. I don't have to take carburetor off or try to be a contortionist and do that with it on the engine. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the 1454 in there. And then, yeah, so we'll go to number 12. needs more fuel. So let's see how that goes. Make that jet change, and we'll go do some more driving. All right, a little bit more driving here. I think this is pretty decent. I'm gonna go to another spot where I can get a little bit more aggressive with it, but we're not too far off, I don't think. It certainly liked it. I may monkey around a little bit with the step-up spring. For sure, I need to continue to play with the AVS. I think it needs to be just a hair tighter. We'll find out, but again, I'm not driving this truck super aggressively everywhere I go, so for me it's more about just low RPM, under 5,000 performance, and off idle, and just cruising, and really that's about it. I'm not trying to hot rod this thing. I'm not trying to push it to 6,500 and race it everywhere. So right now we're not too bad, I don't think. So I'm gonna cruise it for just a little bit more. Like I said, get into some more higher RPM and higher mile per hour type stuff, and see how she likes it. But we're getting close. We're getting really close. All right, we're back home again. I made a little bit AVS adjustment to it, and quite honestly, I don't know that I'm going to go any further with it. I may, just kind of naturally, you're going to keep an eye on it, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to call it pretty close to being done. I was going to make another fuel change and go up to perhaps 15 on the tuning chart. That would get me just a little richer, but to be very honest with you, I don't know how much that's going to make a difference. We're getting close, so let me get under hood, and we'll talk about next steps. So the question always gets asked, how do you know when you're done tuning? That's a bit of an open-ended question, because as far as I'm concerned, with all the different types of driving that you may potentially do, if you change elevation, you may never be done with it. But for where I drive here locally and what I'm doing with it, I'm pretty satisfied where it's at. It aggressively comes off the line good, cruises very good, there's no surging, there's no dead spots, there's no any hesitation at any of those points, at any of the RPM levels that I just drove it at. 95% of what I just did over the last few steps here has all been 6,500 and under, but most of it's been 5,000 and under RPM anyways. So yeah, you can fight this all you want. You can continue to play with it. You can continue to adjust and tweak and try different fuel pressures and all those things. And I may do that. We're getting into some colder months. It's in the low 70s or upper 60s right now. So it's still fairly warm here, but it's going to get really cold here in the next month or so. And yeah, I may dial that back a little bit more. Who knows? Or I just may just drive it the way it is. So next steps for this, I'm going to change the plugs, because once you get done with the tuning process, putting in a fresh set of plugs isn't a bad idea. That way you can kind of monitor it, see what it's doing, see if you're still getting good color on the plugs and not getting any rich conditions or anything like that. Now, when you read plugs and you leave them in long term, you're more reading the condition of the engine. You're not reading anything in time or a specific time with a carburetor, ignition, or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. We're just looking at the condition, overall condition. If they're a nice golden deep tan color, that's perfect, what I'm looking for. And they weren't too far off from that. So I think they were a little bit on the lean side. But to be very honest with you, I haven't driven this thing aggressively at all. It was still under break-in, and typically in those situations, I don't want to beat it up so much. So take good notes. You're never going to remember any of these things, and you're never going to remember the progression of the steps. So certainly keep a note of what's going on. I will put an end date and time on here so I know when I finish the tuning or evaluating, and that way I can go back to it if I ever need to. That was the last step I made as an ABS adjustment after I had added a little bit more fuel, and I can go down and look at the process of it. So that's pretty much it. Again, you can monkey around with this quite a bit if you want to, but in all honesty, that's going to cover it. So take good notes, get a calibration kit, make sure your timing is right. And I say right, it's not set at the factory specification. Add a little bit of timing to it, continue to adjust it, play with it. Make sure you've got all the initial adjustment on the carburetor done correctly. And this process goes really easy. How much time total did I have in this? I would say from when I started to where I ended, I probably have 4.5 hours, somewhere in there. Not quite 5, I don't think. But there's a lot of driving in between here. You've got to put it through a lot of different situations. Now, when I was in the stock calibration, I had already knew what was working there, so this was very quick. This wasn't an hour, half hour, whatever. This was 10 or 15 minutes, just verifying that I still had that hesitation and make the decision on what I wanted to do with it. I added more fuel, and then we started adding timing. So all those things are important. Make sure you go back and look at some of the older videos I did on how to set up a carburetor for tuning and what all the circuits are, the step-up springs, accelerator pump. All those things are critical. If you understand what's going on there, you'll be able to quicker make a decision on what you need to do next when you're going through the tuning process. So you have any questions on this one, don't hesitate, leave them down below. I'll be happy to answer them. But get out there and tune your junk. Get going.